Hi guys, today I'm sharing how to make a sawtooth star quilt block using nothing but pre-cut fabrics. And for this tutorial, I'm going to be using charm packs. These are a type of pre-cut quilting fabric that comes in 5-inch squares. You can certainly make this block without pre-cuts, and in fact, that's the more common way to do it. And you do waste a little bit extra fabric when you're using charm packs, but I just wanted to make a video that shows you it's possible to make a quilt block like this using charm squares. For this quilt block, you're going to need 3 squares that make up the star and 3 that will be used to make the background. These Hi, Clementine. It's been a while since we've had a Clementine appearance on my channel, and if you didn't know, this is my cat Clementine, who my channel is named after. We're going to be cutting each of these squares to the right size so that we have all the pieces we need to make the star. And remember, you can of course do this with any fabric. It does not need to be a pre-cut. If you have different fabric, you can just follow along and cut them to the sizes that I'm showing you, and you'll get the same result. So first I'm taking my center square and I'm trimming a 1/2 inch off 2 of the sides, and that's going to give me a 4.5-inch square. Next, we're taking the 2 other pieces of the star fabric and we're cutting them into 4s so that each one will be made into 4 2.5-inch squares. Next, we're going to do that same thing with one of our background fabrics by cutting it into 4 pieces. So we're going to have 4 squares that are 2.5 inches, and these are going to be the corner of the block. The last thing we're going to do is trim the rectangles that go between the star points, and we're going to need 4 of these total. So to get that from a charm square, we're going to trim a 1/2 inch off here and then cut it in half so that these measure 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. So I'm starting by cutting 1/2 inch off of one of the sides. Then I'm going to cut it in half this way. So to go over what we cut, again, it's one 4.5-inch square, 8 squares that are 2.5 inches, and these are your star points, 4 squares that are 2.5 inches, and these are the corners of the block, and 4 rectangles that are 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. And these are the background of your flying geese, or the area that is between the star points. So before we start assembling the block, I'm going to show you another little trick I do that makes it a little bit easier. So I like to flip all of my star point pieces over so that they're face down and lay them on the 45-degree angle on my cutting mat. And what I'm going to do is trace a line across the back. And that's going to help with sewing because we are going to be sewing these at an angle across the back. So I take my ruler and a piece of fabric chalk, or you can use a pen, and I'm just going to be tracing a 45-degree angle across the back of all of these squares. So the first thing we're going to do for sewing is assemble what's known as flying geese. And these are the portion of the quilt block that looks like this. So these are made up of one of the rectangles of background fabric and 2 of the squares that you cut for your star points. We sew these at an angle, which is why we drew the lines across the backs of the star point squares. To start sewing this, you're going to take one of your rectangles and one of your star point squares. You're going to lay the square face down on top of the block like this, so that the angle that you drew on here is going across like this. And then we're going to be sewing on that line. And now I'm going to trim off this portion of the triangle a 1/4 inch away from that stitching line. You can do this with your rotary cutter, but this is such a short seam that I just like using regular scissors. And you can see that now we have that nice angle across there, and this is starting to look like a star point. But before we sew the other half on, we're going to press this with an iron so that it lays flat. Here's how that block looks after pressing. So now I'm going to take one of my other squares of star point fabric and lay it face down on top over the other half of the rectangle. You want your edges to be lined up along all of the sides, and we're going to be sewing along this line here that we marked. The tips of these are going to overlap, and that's what you want to happen. So again, we sewed along that line that we marked, and I'm going to trim off this portion of the triangle, a 1/4 inch away from the stitching line. And after trimming, we're going to open this out and press again. And here's how that block looks after pressing the other side. So now we're going to repeat this process 3 more times to create a total of 4 flying geese. So follow this process with the remaining rectangles and star point squares that you have. As you're sewing these, I just wanted to mention that this is a really great opportunity for chain piecing, which is when you sew one piece and then continue into your next one without cutting the thread in the middle. So I'm going to sew all of these sides at once with one continuous seam. At this stage, you should have 4 blocks that look like this. And the next step is to assemble these into strips with your other pieces of fabric. I like to do this by laying out my pieces the way they'll look in the finished block. So I have these 4 pieces around the center. I have my center fabric that's going to go here. And I have my 4 pieces of fabric that will make up the corners. After I lay it out like this, I like to separate it into strips that I will piece together. So I'll be sewing here and here to make this into a strip, along here to make this into a strip, and along here to make this. And once those are assembled in strips, we'll be piecing them together along these longer seams. I should mention that you can chain piece these as well, but if you're more of a visual person like me, you might want to sew each seam separately so you can see your block coming together as you build it. Once you have all of your strips sewn, you're going to press your fabrics. I like to press them so that the fabric is pointing away from the star points on these strips because that's the way the fabric naturally wants to lay. On these center blocks, I press it so that the fabric is going towards the center because, again, that's where it naturally wants to lay. And here's how those look after pressing. At this point, if you notice any wonky lines on your blocks, you're going to want to square them up on your cutting mat. And that basically just means taking your ruler and making sure that the line is nice and straight and trimming off any wonky bits that are sticking out along the edge. And that's going to make your final block look a lot nicer. The last step is to piece your strips together into your final block. So I'm taking this top strip and I'm going to lay it over top of this and sew along here. So after sewing that, I'm going to go and press this again, and we will have our finished block. And here we have our finished block. If you have any areas here where it doesn't line up perfectly, just remember you can square it up again and it will look really nice. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I would love to hear how it worked for you in the comments. If you like charm packs, I have a couple other videos that talk about using charm packs for different projects, so make sure you go and check those out. Thanks for watching.